Welcome to Mining Over Canada. Join the Canadian Securities Exchange and our partners in a first-hand look into our country's vast mining landscape.
Hi, my name's Anna Serin. I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. We are here as part of a special presentation as part of Mining Over Canada. We are here during BC Week where I'm the host, and this is probably my most exciting interview to date. It is with my father. So you all know me as Anna Serin, but I actually was born Anna Marie Brynelsen. My father, the legend Dal Brynelsen, has been in the mining sector as long as I've been around, and perhaps longer. And we get to talk today about some of our family history because we have a deep entrenched history in the mining sector in British Columbia. So we're going to dive into that. So Dad, Dal Brynelsen, thank you so much for doing this. I know that this makes you a bit nervous to have your daughter put you on video and hit record, but I appreciate that you're willing to take the chance.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anna. Very nice introduction. And of course, you know, I'm fairly new to this, but I'm not new to the mining game. So I can talk about something I know quite a bit about. Before you were born, I was in school, and I had a very famous uncle. You had a great uncle, Uncle Bern Brynelsen, and he was probably one of Canada's great mining men. And so we were very lucky to be introduced into the business by such an amazing, wonderful person who, you know, is loved by everybody. He was a big man, and he went to UBC. He was born in Vancouver, as was my father, your grandfather, and family. I think now you're 6 generations BC. So
I want to stop you there, Dad, because you took me to 2 houses that still exist off of Main Street in Vancouver. And so what's the story? So
okay, yeah. So I'll sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. So your great grandfather was had a tugboat company in Vancouver, and his company hauled coal from literally from Newcastle Island and Boat Harbor and on Vancouver Island. They had a coal mines there, and he hauled coal to Vancouver, where it was used by the ships of the day that were sort of steam powered sailing ships, and people used the coal to heat their houses, and they used the coal to generate electricity. And so he had this very successful company, and he believed that Vancouver would start on Main Street, which of course the name Main Street, you know, is a bit of a clue. So just off of Main Street, east of Main Street, about 2 blocks, there's a street that's about 4 blocks long called John Street. And he bought 2 lots, and he built 2 identical, for the day, quite elaborate homes. And your great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather lived in those homes. Your your great-grandfather, there were 3 brothers, Uncle Bern, Uncle Ernie, and my dad, John. And they were raised in that house. It was a famous house because your great-great-grandfather was very good friends with the mayor and the police chief. And I think there was a lot of parties that went on there. And the houses are still there. You can actually, there's quite small bungalows all around them. And then there's these 2 mansions on John Street, just east of Main. Anyway, that's where we started.
And it's amazing because you've taken me by those houses, and I can't believe they're still standing. I mean,
I know, they're great. Yeah,
I think
they're really
their family, as far as Vancouver is concerned, to have a lineage that far back and that we haven't been kicked out yet is quite something, wouldn't you say?
It's amazing. I've been asked to leave town on occasion, but normally it's to go to Africa or somewhere to look at a mining property. So,
Okay, so I want to get into you, but why don't we actually start there? Let's talk about Uncle Bern, because Uncle Bern
yeah.
is a legend. He was inducted into the Mining Hall of Fame in 1991. I remember my memories of Uncle Bern. He was just one of the nicest, kindest souls I think I've ever met. But anyone I've ever met in the mining sector, anywhere that knows him, speaks of him like he was an angel. I mean, he was just so loved. So let's talk about him. So he went and got his mining engineer degree, correct?
Correct.
And then
At
what
UBC.
happened after that?
Okay, so all of these stories are intertwined, and I could talk all night about Uncle Bern. I've actually talked to a few of my present day partners, and they were saying, "Well, tell this story, and I'm going, I can't cover all of the history, just in this brief thing, but." He did graduate in 1936, I believe, from UBC. He was a mining engineer, but his real talent, I think, laid with geology and his ability to communicate and provide, that human touch with the prospectors of the day. That basically, he grubstaked them. That meant that he, give them $100 or $500, and they go out and look and try and find mines. And the sort of the one of the big mines, I mean, he had many mines that he developed over the years in Canada and the United States. But one of the mines that he actually owned was Brenda Mines up near Summerland, and just off Lake Okanagan. If you go up the bypass out of Kelowna, you go up that long hill, and as you get near the top of that hill, there's a huge earth structure on the left, and that's actually the tailing dam for the Brenda Mines. And so he grubstaked a mechanic who was working in Penticton.
Dad, what does grubstake mean?
Grubstake means, there's prospectors, they don't have any real access to money. They're not getting a paycheck, and they need money to be able to go out, live in the woods, and with their magnifying glass and their prospector's hammer and chip away. And that's where most of Canada's mines were found. And a really good example of that was the Brenda mine, because the fellow that found it was an auto mechanic out of, I think, Kelowna, actually, and his weekends were spent driving around in an old four-wheel drive vehicle he had, and looking for what we call showings. And he discovered a vein. It was about 6 feet wide, and it had mineralization. Sulfide mineralization, and he took samples and had them assayed and discovered that there was that it was a copper molybdenum deposit. And the story goes from there, because of course he then needed money to, other than getting a few samples assayed, he needed money to do more work and drill more holes. And so, because Uncle Bern had such a great reputation of being so kind to these guys, he was directed to Uncle Bern, who at the time was running Western Canada for Noranda Mines, which was a big multinational mining company, Canadian mining company, quite famous itself. And so the guy came to Uncle Bern, and Uncle Bern, loved the idea of doing something in BC. He also was a bit of an expert on molybdenum, because he had built a mine, which was called the Boss Mountain Mine, out east of 100 Mile House. And that's where I started, because when I was 14, 15, and 16, I was sent up there for my summers to work in this mine for Uncle Bern, who was developing it, mainly exploration. And that mine was a very successful molybdenum mine owned by Noranda. And that's where I sort of got my feet wet in the mining industry. And it was that knowledge that Uncle Bern had about molybdenum and its contacts with the Japanese, who were very keen on, on buying and financing mines, that led him to have a high level of interest in the 6-foot vein that this mechanic from Kelowna had discovered. And so
I first of all, I have to say that based on our safety and ESG requirements, I don't think there's many 14-year-old nephews that get to have that opportunity nowadays. So that's a pretty rare opportunity.
I was
that at least.
I was so spoiled by the miners. I got to do everything. There was absolutely nothing I wasn't allowed to do. So at the age of 14, I could run, a D13 cat. I could drive the dump truck. I could drive the geologist around, and who was Korean, CC Chang, and so I was the driver at 14, no license, and I was also introduced to working underground. So I was washing the walls for the geologists so they could map them, and so it was a fantastic.
Okay, tell the story, because your love of the mining sector grew before that, and I love this story. So tell the story of your rock collection.
So the Uncle Bern had very close friends with the executive in Noranda who lived in Toronto area. That's where their head office was. Archie Bell, Al Powell's, some of the, famous mining people in Canada, really. And they came to Vancouver, and they would hang out with us up at our summer home at Secret Cove, where we now live. This is where we are now. And so it was decided that they needed to have a party and I've been running a rock collection since I was about 8 years old. So I had all these mineralized rocks. And so the aim of the party was to have all of Canada's great mining people at our house, consuming, I'm sure, a lot of, famous Canadian whiskey. And the contest was to see in front of a panel of geologist judges who could actually identify the various samples that I had from my rock collection. And so it was a great evening, and it was and I was exposed to some of the greatest mining people on earth, who were really close friends, and so it was a great opportunity, and it was also an amazing introduction to an incredible industry. So
totally. Okay, so one thing I want to get into a little bit, because Brenda Mines was such a success, and I think one thing that's important for people to understand as we go through we've been across the country now, we've talked to experts across the country, is the anguish, the pain, the suffering, the upside, the beauty, the market fluctuations. So can you touch a little bit on the Brenda story, because it's a great story?
Well, Noranda Mines had an auction on the property, which Uncle Bern organized, and they decided that they were not going to proceed because the price of moly was very low, the grades were low, and they just figured it would never make a mine. So they went back to Uncle Bern and said, we're gonna pass on this, and we're and obviously it goes back to you, because Uncle Bern had arranged title for it in a company called Brenda Mines, which was a little private company. So he needed to raise money. So he raised money at 10 cents a share, and he raised probably $50,000 at 10 cents a share. Your aunt, who worked in Noranda in the assay lab with my cousin Karen, his daughter, were each given the opportunity of buying
Auntie Dana?
Auntie Dana, yeah.
Really?
Some of those shares, yeah. So I just did the math on this. So Auntie Dana invested $200.
Oh my God.
Well, yeah, and that got her 20,000 shares at 10 cents. And that 20,000 shares eventually got bought out by Noranda Mines at $22 a share, earning her $48,000, which was probably the price back then of a waterfront home in West Van.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, a shout out to Auntie Dana, your sister, who is BC Woman of the Year award on several occasions, an honorary doctorate at UBC, and you know, the developer of the Infant Development Program in British Columbia. I mean, our family doesn't quit.
No, I'm still working.
I know. I'm glad I got you on a break tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no. So sorry. Keep going about Brenda Mines. So
Yeah.
he
So
had-
yeah. So what they done is they drilled what we call down dip. So they didn't really understand the geological structure of this particular ore body. They didn't even consider it, of course, an ore body, but they did do drilling. Noranda did, but they drilled sort of in one direction, which is basically down dip. So they had very mixed results. So if you could imagine, you know, a bunch of barn doors lined up, and if you drilled, you know, between those doors, you'd actually miss the ore body. Occasionally they'd clip one. But because when they hit it, they'd have such a long intersection, they'd throw it out as not really be meaningful. So when Uncle Bern got the property back, he took the drill rig and he actually stepped it out the other way and drilled across the barn doors. And all of a sudden they had an ore body. So they did that program, I think it was in about 1967. And Noranda Mines all of a sudden went, whoops, you know, this is a big deal. So so they approached Uncle Bern and they said that they would like to make a bid for the company. Eventually they ended up paying $22 a share for it.
And it was just they had drilled in one direction, he drilled in the other, and
yeah. And he was a mining engineer, not a geologist, but he had a real good sense for, and he really believed every mine that he built, and there's a lot of them, and he discovered and did, you know, he was always the one that would lead the geologists and say, why don't we look at it this way or do this? And the result, of course, were, you know, a long history of success. And, you know, we've kind of, and that was back in the late 60s. He then went on to form a company called Bermuda, which eventually became Teck. And in Bermuda, you know, he had all of the Teck coal assets in the Rocky Mountains, Sekunka coal and different coal assets. And he had a lot of other properties that eventually became mine. So, you know, it wasn't a one-shot wonder. I mean, he really achieved.
Yeah, and what an incredible man. Okay, you have to finish off the Bern story.
Okay.
With his celebration.
So we were building a hotel here at Secret Cove called the Jolly Roger, and Dad and I, and we had a few workmen, and I had no idea what I was doing. And Dad, being a mechanical engineer, also had no idea what he was doing. So we had this Time Life books on home construction, and we were using that to build a hotel. And Uncle Bern and I were really close because he didn't have a son. So I was kind of like his son. And so when he got the news that they were buying him out at $22 a share, he decided to come up and visit me at Secret Cove. And I had built this little cabin. I was about 18 years old. And anyway, out of the night, Uncle Bern shows up. And so he had a bottle of whiskey, and although I wasn't of legal age, you know, I thought, well, I you know, for the first time, I might try alcohol. and with him, you know, he was showing me, he had all these sheriff certificates that he had that were on his desk, and they were in bearer form. That means, well, you know what bearer form means, and they don't have that anymore, I don't think, do they?
Bearer form essentially a signed check. It's cash.
It's cash. It's like cash. So anyway, so we figured out, in this kind of muddled state we were in, that he probably had about $2 million worth of shares on him that were laying on his desk that he just threw in his raincoat when he came up. And your great-grandparents' home was on the waterfront down below the hotel, which we were building then. So it wasn't really there. It was just this cabin in the woods. And so Uncle Bern finally said, well, okay, I got to go to bed. I got to go down. So he went down the hill to the waterfront to go to bed. And in the morning, I get up and I kind of rub my head a bit and say, well, I better go down and see Uncle Bern and see how he is. So I walk down the hill, and in the trees and the limbs and the bushes are Brenda share certificates, about $2 million of them, just floating around. And so I picked them all up and I took them down to the house, and Uncle Bern's standing there in his underwear with a coffee and goes, boy, what a night we had. And I said, yeah, you sure did. And I said, look what I found on the way down. I'm a rich man now. And he said, oh my gosh. He said, I wondered where all those share certificates went. So he had a good laugh about that, didn't seem to bother him too much. And
oh my God.
Okay. Great story.
That is the best story. So in the end, Brenda Mines, and we talked about this earlier in our pre-chat, what was the reserve that came out of Brenda Mines?
I don't know the numbers. It was a $1 billion deposit. I just don't know how many tons. It was an open pit mine, and I'd be reluctant to fire out numbers that I'm not sure of.
Yeah. But you talked about, one thing that you talked about I thought was interesting, and I think this is really important to discuss in the mining sector, especially in discovery, is that there was a period of time where even if there was a reserve, they didn't feel it was of value because the value of the commodity itself within the market. And then there was changes in technology that all of a sudden made that commodity more valuable, right? I mean,
that's what happened with Brenda, because and very good luck for Uncle Bern and not so great luck for Noranda, but the price of moly was very low. It was depressed, and molybdenum is used in hardening steel. It's used, as a lubricant, and there's not a lot of molybdenum mines. So the price was low, and then in the 60s, there all of a sudden started to be enormous growth. Japan needed molybdenum, and the price of molybdenum went up considerably, and the economics changed. So, you catch these swings. I think we're in one now, so these are called secular bull markets in commodities. And we've gone through, since 2007, a very depressed commodity market. And the supply has been depressed by the, increased demands, rightly so, by indigenous people and environmentalists, and the need to make sure that everything complies, that all of the various interested parties have their input. And so now to get a mining permit can take 10 to 15 years. And, there's been a big gap on the supply side with these mines trying to get permits. And so,
Yeah, I mean, Canada is a leading force in ESG and CSR requirements. We really are, from everything that I've had the chance to learn as we've kind of traveled across the country virtually, is we really are one of the leading forces, but there's a cost to that. It's very expensive. And so everything has to be working in perfect order, and the commodity has to make a certain price to make it worthwhile to go through that process, right?
Sure. And of course, the pioneers like Uncle Bern got the low-hanging fruit. So the fellow from Kelowna found a vein that was open on the surface, and all those veins, or most of them, have been explored and drilled and discarded, because only 1 in 10,000 properties becomes a mine. So
Absolutely.
So it's rare. It's been ignored. The other thing is that the young people haven't really been that interested in in going into the mining business, the exploration business, sleeping in tents in the wilderness and getting eaten alive by black flies. They just, where they can, make computer games and do software programs where they can become billionaires. So there's been a real shortage of talent of the, coming out of the young people in this era. So without the manpower, the expertise, and without the motivation on the part of governments to approve mines where they can be criticized afterwards for doing so, there's a real supply side shortage. And now, of course, we're coming out of a pandemic shortly, hopefully, and the world is going to turn its attention to infrastructure spending. So they'll be building bridges and roads and trains and all of those. All of that activity requires, an enormous amount. Electric cars, EVs, totally replacing the existing fleet. All of it requires metals, and the old mines that are still running, are nearing the end of their life, and so there's a huge. We anticipate a huge secular upturn and bull market in resources starting right now.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point. I've had the opportunity to talk to some younger people that are coming into the sector. And the one thing that that is across the board is passion. People that are in this industry, they're passionate about it. They're into it. There's not many sectors that have that kind of dedication and passion, whether it's tirelessly working and never knowing if it's going to work out, or being in the bush surrounded by, grizzlies and mosquitoes. But there's a huge passion, dedicated to this sector. I really do hope that the next generation does come in. I think they demand different things than generations before them, but it's up to them to implement that. So I think there's great opportunity. Leading off of Uncle Bern, I want to move to you. Now you're on the hot spot, Dad.
Oh,
Your turn.
Don't believe anything.
So Uncle Bern kind of fostered this passion inside of you.
Oh.
And I can see why. I mean, he was just such an incredible man. You actually started out your career in commercial development. Is that the right
term? Land development.
Land
development.
And this has nothing to do with mining, but quickly, you just have to tell the story because it's the greatest story about the end of your career.
Oh.
You had a great career in land development, but let's tell the end of it.
Well, the end of it was, I guess, 24% interest rates, and you had to, anything to do with real estate, particularly land that has no ability to produce revenue, you have to personally guarantee, and so you basically gamble your home every time you do a deal, and when you do a deal and it's successful. It's kind of like mining, typically there's a big payoff, but then you're out of work and you have to then get another piece of land, etc. And I just didn't like the idea of having to gamble my house, our family homes, every time that we did another deal. With mining, it's so risky that it actually is de-risked because we're financed with equity financing, and so a bunch of people put up small amounts of money, shareholders, and they risk, losing it all or making a lot of money. And so it's a different way to handle the risk. And I frankly, I love mining. I love the whole industry. I love the treasure hunt and the people that are in it, and the fact that you're out in the country, you're not in a city, and you're traveling the world, you're meeting different cultures, on their own level. You're not a tourist, you're actually actively involved in their lives and their success. So it's a great industry.
Well, you're one of the greats. You worked with a lot of the greats. You're one of the greats. There's so many stories that we could tell. One of my favorites, actually, I'm putting you on the spot here because I didn't tell you this in our pre-chat, but I love, don't be nervous. I love the story. I think you were grounded somewhere. You were grounded, your flight couldn't take off, and you ended up in a pub meeting these Irishmen. And by the end of the conversation, you guys had the tenements for half the country of Armenian oil and gas concessions. Am I telling
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the stories go on and on. You guys are amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's a very small industry. There's not many people in it. And at the level, at the entrepreneurial level, where you're going around dealing with governments and acquiring concessions. And so I've worked in a lot of countries all around the world, and you run into the same people.
Yeah.
Different bars, but same people. And then we share stories, and we hear that, there's been a discovery in Armenia, or there's been a discovery in Kenya or Uganda, big discovery in oil. And so Papua New Guinea, and, so you end up bouncing around the world, chasing the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, speaking about your dream, so you were quite successful in land development. One of the stories I love is the interest rates were insane. And I remember you telling me the story that one day you went into work and your office actually was down in a part of Vancouver that people now know very differently than what it was. Because I remember going to Brynelsen Benson, which was your real firm, which is it's essentially where Carderos is today in Vancouver, right?
Yep.
But it was just dirt and a train track and your office, and I think there was a keg down there.
My original office was the keg boathouse, and then the keg came along and said, we really would like turn your office into a restaurant, but we'll move you next door to the Woodward's Marine Building. And so we were there right on the water. The office was at high tide. The water was a foot under the office.
Remember that office.
Yeah.
And so the story you told me was you literally went into the office one day and the phone stopped ringing and you called BC Tel at the time, which was our service provider. And you said, is something wrong with the phones?
Yeah.
And that was just it. That was the end of kind of that line of business. And that's when you really made the shift, isn't it?
So the real estate business, like the mining business, has its swings. I know we've been on a long run up, and it seems to continue nonstop. But back then, in the '80s, it completely stopped, and that's when I started working. Originally in Rossland, BC. We built a couple of small gold mines there, and because Uncle Bern had stake ground there in 1936, so I just chased him up and said, what do you have? And ended up in Rossland, which is a fantastic town, great ski town.
You're still involved in Rossland, right? After all these years, you still have tenements there, don't you?
We have in a private company the southern half of the mineralized belt in Rossland. From 1936.
Unbelievable. Okay, so if you don't mind touching a little bit, so the history on Rossland is the Leroy story, right?
Right. So two prospectors were prospecting in the area around what was to become Rossland, and they came across a vein 6 feet wide, a quarter ounce. They didn't know, but it looked prospective, and so at the time you're allowed to stake 2 claims per person, and there were 2 of them, so they staked 4 claims following the vein on the surface, and then one guy stayed behind, and the other prospector walked to Nelson from Rossland and went in to file the claims, and the claims were $10 a claim, $40, and he only had $30. So the gold commissioner in Nelson said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pay for all 4 claims. I'll pay the $40, but I get 1 claim. And those 4 claims became the Center Star, the Evening Star, the Leroy. They became the entire Leroy mine, which was Western Canada's second biggest gold producer. At the time, it was the biggest gold mine in the British Empire. Produced 3.5 million ounces of high-grade gold underground, and it's now in my museum. So it started the Toronto Stock Exchange, and there's a lot of stories, and that was what I was introduced to by Uncle Bern when I went looking for something to do after the real estate collapse. So.
Amazing. Okay, so you brought up the Toronto Stock Exchange. Let's talk about that a tiny bit. Whatever you feel that you're comfortable talking about. But one thing I want to get into a little bit, because I think at the end of the day, everyone is really seeking, what is the value proposition? How do I know when to invest, where to invest? You have been personally, I'm sure, through many, many, many cycles. I'll never forget. So you opened your doors to me during a very bad market and said, come and work with me. And we worked on some mining projects together, which we had a lot of fun. I'm surprised how much fun we had. We had a beer fridge that was typically stocked. And I remember saying to you, oh my God, I love this. This is amazing. I love this. And the markets were so bad. And you said, if you like this now, you just wait.
And you're still waiting.
I'm here. So
yeah.
talk a little bit about that, because the Toronto Stock Exchange really was built on the backs of mining and exploration in Canada, same as the Vancouver Stock Exchange, raising capital. And that was a big part of your role for a long time, right? I mean, you raised enormous amount of capital for an enormous amount of projects globally. Like you're obviously a big part of your heart, Sim Rossland, but you raise money globally for projects globally.
Right.
Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I think this is people don't understand this as much, and it's a difficult part of the process to understand. You're investing in, the speculation.
Yeah, you're basically, buying a dream and the hope of, vast riches, and they do happen. And that's of course what keeps the industry going, and the industry, provides all of the basic things that we need to build, the modern environment that we live in. So it's an absolutely necessary industry. So let me just make a bit of a statement. So we have gone through. So there's 7 billion people on Earth. We're now in the midst of a pandemic. Most of the mines in the world are existing mines that are getting old. There are not the people to explore and discover that we used to have. The need for raw materials, for metals, is, endless, because the governments of the world have really not, other than China, not spent that much money on new infrastructure. So the infrastructure in Canada, the United States, and Europe, all needs to be replaced. And when you come out of an economic downturn or a crisis like the pandemic, the quickest way to put people to work is to build infrastructure, because that drives all the other industries, highways and trains and, you name it, airports. So you've got sort of the convergence of two things. You've got, a shortage of mines and discoveries and rising demand. So you've got a supply side issue and a demand side issue, which will cause prices to go much higher. And everybody's predicting that. So we're at the beginning of a bull market of metals that maybe like nothing we've ever seen.
That's pretty exciting.
So if you're young, this is a great industry to get into right now, because the rewards could be amazing.
Dad, it's been such a pleasure to go through all of this background. I mean, Uncle Bern's story is amazing. Your story is amazing. I know there's so much more to tell, so maybe we'll bring you on for part two. But one thing I want to talk about is, what are you doing now? Because I know that you're not retired.
No, I'm not.
So tell us what keeps your days busy now.
So 23 years ago, I was working with a famous mining promoter, Bruce McDonald, and a fellow from Australia came in, a young guy, and I met him, and he had a property in China. He had sections. It was not a PowerPoint on a computer. It was basically a flip chart, and I looked at this, and I looked at it, and I said, his name is Mladen Ninkoff, and I said, Mladen, this is a great ore body. And he looked at me and he said, it is? And I said, you're supposed to be saying that to me, not the other way around. And he said, well, I've gone all around the world with this, trying to get people interested in financing it, and everybody just sort of, hums and haws and thanks me, and like all of a sudden, you're showing serious interest. And I said, yeah, I'm seriously interested in this project. So that was the beginning of a 23-year relationship. I was one of the original directors of the company, and Mladen and I have developed, a very close relationship, very strong friendship, and over all those years. As a matter of fact, this coming year, he turned 60. So, so he was 37, I guess, when I first met him. And he has, and the board of the company and the employees in the company, we've been in China for 23 years. We have, with the contractors and with our own employees, we have probably close to 1,000 people that work in the mine. It's a great deposit. The company's always been profitable. What's really interesting is when we went into China, there was something like 180 or 90 North American mining companies in China. Everybody wanted to be there. And at the moment, we believe that we are the only Western mining company operated in China, Griffin Mining. It's a great company, and I'm really proud to be sort of ending my career, which may not be ending very soon, but it's a great achievement to be part of this amazing group of people, and to experience China for 23 years, because 23 years ago, China was 2,000 years of history. You could see that was the people living. And now it's the most modern country that you could be in, everything to do, and wireless, and Tesla's there, and Starbucks is there, and Ford is there, and all the big North American companies are manufacturing there, selling into this 1.5 billion person market that, there's I think 8% of the Chinese have cars, and 100% of them want 2 cars. So you can imagine the consumerism, that the opportunity for Western companies is amazing. And so I've been hands-on for all these years, and grown to love the people, love the country, and really miss, since last October, we haven't been able to go into our mine, but we're a public company. We trade on the AIM exchange. GFM is the symbol. I have to do a little bit of promoting because that's what I do. And look it up. It's a great company.
Well, and what I love about this story, and I think this is important as well, is this is a story of a man who traveled the world trying to get people interested in this project that he believed in, just like Uncle Bern did with Brenda Mines.
Yes. Yeah.
Just like you did with many of your projects. And he got the right people involved, and over a very short overnight success of 23 years. I mean, it really is quite a spectacular amazing what you guys have done. I love the story of Griffin Mine myself. It is listed on the AIM Exchange in London. And it's a great story. It's a great story of where if you believe and you're passionate and you have the right expertise and the right team around you, there really is possibility in this sector. So I think it's a great project that you're tailing off your career. Let's not say ending your career. Let's say tailing off. You and I both know it's never over.
Well, I think Uncle Bern was still doing deals. He passed at 94. And I know up until, he turned 90, he would hold court in his kitchen and make steak sandwiches at lunch. And we'd all sit there, all the various people that I've been, blessed with being around. And they would all just sit there and listen to Uncle Bern talk about, well, I've got this new project, boys. And everybody would sort of lean forward and grasp their steak sandwich a little harder and drool out of the corner of their mouth. Yes, Uncle Bern, because everybody called him Uncle Bern.
That's right. Dad, thank you so much. I know that you were very nervous about doing this because you were cautious of what stories I was going to bring up. And, it's the reason I built Mining Over Canada was because I want people to feel the feeling I had hearing these stories. And, you've been so amazing to me. You've been such a mentor. You've opened so many doors for me. I will always be so thankful for everything you've done for me. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Anna. And I'm proud of what you're doing. I think that the programming you're doing is fantastic. The more we can introduce, young people to the industry, I think the better off all of society is going to be, because we definitely need to really focus on more discoveries and build more mines. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
Dad, I love you. Dal Brynelsen, the myth, the man. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, honey. Yeah, my pleasure, of course. Yeah.